Okay, you're right. Thank you. Selamat siang Bapak Ibu semuanya. Thank you so much for coming. Today we're very glad to have Soonwha Yi, coming currently senior research fellow at Georgetown University in Jakarta. She has extensive experience working on this topic, so really the right person to talk about migration, especially international migration, with 20 years in World Bank and then now being in Jakarta, being a part of the scholars at Georgetown University. So we have some people online, and please, if you're online, please let us know if you have any questions, put in the chat room and we'll try to follow up also. And in the room, if you have any questions, please just raise your hand. Thank you so much, please, Soonwha.
Okay, thank you very much for having me here today. And it's given this is rather small room, maybe we can have a quick introduction so we know who's who. Yeah. Name and this program that exactly. Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon once again. My name is Rutendo Chimombe from Zimbabwe. I'm studying here in MA Kaka department and a faculty of economic and business in S2. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adi. I'm a student of Master Population and Labor Economic as well. And currently I'm working in development sector, specifically in migration area. So happy to be here, actually. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Mila Novita. I'm a PhD student in economics department. Now I'm in 5th semester. Okay, nice to meet you.
Selamat siang, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I'm Hannah Duncan. I'm in the social policy department of the World Bank as a social development specialist. I've been here in Jakarta working for the World Bank for 3 years, so trying to fill Soonwha's very big footprints that she's left behind here. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Okay, maybe before we start, so today's topic is about the international labor migration. So before we start, maybe we can put us on the same page in terms of what migration we are talking about, no? So we can see, like, in terms of boundaries, we can have an internal and international migration. So internal migration means that you move within the national boundaries. like from Sulawesi to Java. And international migration is you move across the boundaries, national boundaries. So from Jakarta to Singapore, for instance, which is a subject to policies and regulations in both origin and destination countries. But when it comes to type of migrants, we can also see forced displacement, we often call refugees. And so those like Myanmar individuals arriving in Aceh, for instance, no, because of conflicts and violence in their home countries or in their hometown. We can have a student migration. You can maybe come from different countries or different regions, no? And then we have so-called economic migration, labor migration. You move to one place to another for better economic well-being. So this talk is largely about economic migration. Why? Because in our region, the migration largely is dominated by economic motivations to find jobs and have a better earnings. And in terms of duration of migration, we can have permanent migration, right? Emigration. You move out of your country to live in a different country with a residency. And we're going to have also long-term migration, like me, who went to the US for my job, and then now I finished and I'm leaving the country, no? So I stayed there for over 20 years. And then we have a temporary migration. So what does that mean, temporary migration? It can refer to like a seasonal labor migrants, like from Papua New Guinea to Australia for agricultural jobs for 9 months. Yeah. We can also have labor migration, temporary labor migration, where the Indonesians are moved to Malaysia for a job for 1 year, no? But that can be renewed up to 10 years. So they can stay there for 10 years. Or they go to Korea for 3-year contract. So then they come back home. So that's a temporary labor migration. So when we look at these recent labor migration flows, it's largely, in this region, it's largely dominated by temporary labor migration. People go for a job and stay there for 3-4 years and come back home, and they may go out again, even if it is not the same destination. And so today's focus is really international labor migration, focusing more on temporary labor migration. Why? Because data shows that also these people are more likely to send remittances home. So these remittances are directly related to poverty reduction and development. So in that sense, understanding more about it is, I think, important for policymakers and also your understandings about how the policies are going in this space. So having said that, well, we have a bit of a lot of time allocated. So my presentation may be a bit long. And so if you need any clarification, please jump in, don't wait. But the observations can wait later for discussion, yeah? So let's start by looking at just the big picture first. So what are we looking at in terms of migration trend in this region? In this region, I'm referring to East Asia and Pacific, which means from Japan all the way to Southeast Asia and including Pacific countries. So one thing is interesting is the movement of people is largely within the region. So intra-regional migration is a very dynamic, unlike other regions. So if we look at the inflows of migrants into East Asia, Pacific countries, it's a lot of them are from the region, no? And second point is when we look at where people go in terms of income categories. So East Asia, you would think in general, no, people go to higher income countries, high income countries. So of course, you can see here, when we look at people coming from low and middle income countries, a lot of them go to East Asia Pacific high income countries. But also let's not forget how much they are going to low and middle income countries. That's the second point. So for example, if we look at a Japan case here, what it shows is this top 4 origin countries of migrants in Japan in recent years is pretty much predominantly from East Asia and Pacific countries, so topped by Vietnam and China. And then, but let's not also forget these high income migrants from high income countries, no, in EAP. They also go to these low and middle income countries in the EAP as well. They are not just going to high income countries. And I think this phenomena is a little bit interesting as we go further. But nevertheless, migration rates in this region is fairly low. It's around 1% of the population, whereas a global average is about 2.3%, according to our World Bank WD, World Development Report definition. However, does that mean that every country has low migration rates in this region? The answer is no. It's a fairly mixed. No, if we look at Australia, I guess. So Australia and New Zealand, migration rate is over 30% of the population. And if you look at Thailand, Malaysia, that the migration rate is around above 10%. And Korea and Japan are catching up, so they are around 1 to 5% range. So, but the rest of the EAP countries is fairly low. It's like in China, it's less than 1%. No, it's so this. While the migration picture overall in the region is dynamic, in terms of migration rate, is still very low. But at the same time, we have a different picture across the different countries. So, but at the same time, what we also see is interesting is migration rate, how the migration rate has increased or decreased in recent years. So migration rate has expanded very rapidly in this region. And when we compare with the 1990, so over 30-year period, it's this migration rate rapidly expanded, especially from high income country to low and middle income countries. But it's a very low base, right? Let's not forget, it's a very low base. The majority is essentially from low and middle income countries to low and middle income countries. It's like Cambodians, Laotians going to Thailand for their jobs. Indonesians are going to Malaysia for their jobs. So this population had the immigration rate has increased by nearly 150% over the past 3 decades. But at the same time, we can also see the migration catch-up taking place in this region in countries like Korea and Japan, where aging population generates a lot of demand for labor, and also low fertility rate generates labor shortages. Then with this rising migration flows, so next question you would ask then is, who are these migrants? So in general, in the EAP in our region, the dominant migrant population is low skilled, especially the migrants in the ASEAN region. So if we look at Malaysia and Thailand, you can really see those migrants in elementary occupation. So that's a very manual occupation constitute about 40% of their migrant population. And the medium skill, that means like a construction workers, right? So those are taking up nearly the remaining 60%. So it's pretty much, we can group them as low-skilled labor migration. So there, only 1 out of 3 migrants are high-skilled in this region. And I think can we move the bar so that the people can see the title? I don't know whether that is possible. So it's like confirming the existing literature. We can also see here in this region, the low-skilled migrants tend to travel nearby countries compared to high-skilled one. So maybe because the high-skilled one has a less of a budget constraint, there may be a lot of factors play here. But what we see here is that the low-skilled migrants, you can see a lot of them go to Thailand, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Singapore, as you can imagine. And then the other destination includes like Saudi Arabia or other Middle Eastern countries. But on the other hand, if we look at the high-skilled migrants, a lot of them go to the US, right? They don't really necessarily come to the region. So which means the question is the region failing to attracting high-skilled workers to their own region? So with this, what we also can say is migration is likely to expand, right? Because let's putting aside that these demographic shifts and labor shortages and so on, we can also see at the individual level, the desire to migrate has become stronger, especially in Southeast Asia. So according to Gallup surveys of 2023, we can see this desire to migrate in Southeast Asia increased by about 150%, no? When we compare 2021 to 10 years ago, 2011. And this means that it's the question is then, are they all migrating successfully or not, right? But when we look at the data, so it shows about 900 million people want to migrate. 900 million people worldwide want to migrate. But like I said earlier, migration rate is still very low. So which means they cannot, not all of them manage to migrate as they wish. So then if they desire to migrate, so why do they desire to migrate? So this study, IMF study shows that, of course, there are multiple reasons at play, but the regression result shows that income gap is the determinant in explaining why people migrate. But this income gap, when this income gap is interacted with share of a young population in the country. So when in other words, income gap is combined with larger income gap when the large income gap is combined with a larger share of young population, it means the likelihood to migrate is greater. Yes. Yes. So it's a multi-country.
So I2G on the left-hand side.
Yeah.
And then income destination is not their income, but just
Income
like
gap.
average income.
Income gap.
Yeah, you have income destination and income origin. So each
income gap between the origin and destination.
You have both.
So this income destination is income gap, essentially refers to income gap between the two countries, and then you interact it with
How about income
young-
origin?
income origin is a income of the origin country,
So
GDP.
it's not gap, right? You have both.
It's
So
a
the
GDP.
typical gravity model, right?
Yeah,
Is it?
I
I'm
think so.
asking.
If I'm
Okay.
remember
Okay.
correctly, yes.
And this is just the coefficients.
Yeah, these are coefficients. So I think what's interesting is this income gap interacted with share of a young
So the red
population.
one is already income
Mm.
plus the interaction with the young
Yeah.
population.
So then why young people want to move, no? Maybe in this region especially, it may be because of they face limited opportunities at home. So the data on this share of people, young people who are not in education, employment, or training is relatively high. So like in Indonesia, it's almost 22% of the young population. They don't have anything. They are not employed, not in education or training. So they face limited opportunities at home. So therefore they may wish to migrate. And at the same time, they also see the wage differentials are very high, right? So if we look at like a computer professional case, so you are doing exactly the same job, assuming here, no, of course, in detail, there are country variations, but according to this data aggregation, so if we look at the computer professionals in the Philippines, you would make about less than $500. As opposed to Australia, you make about $4,000. So the income gap wage gap is really high, right? So this is a very strong factor for why people want to migrate. And even manufacturing worker case, we see that is even Indonesian manufacturing workers could earn like 7 times in Singapore or 11 times in Hong Kong or 14 times in Korea. So this is a massive a factor influencing why people would like to move to a destination, because essentially you are doing a similar job in your country or in destination. So this high income earning in destination could lead to later on we'll talk about it, will lead to these greater remittances to the country, no? But at the same time, we also see these doors are opening in destination countries for foreign workers. In destination countries like Australia or Thailand, Malaysia, Korea, we see the labor shortages. So they start to make a more favorable labor migration regime for people to migrate. Right? So in Australia's case, so you could see this the unfilled vacancies has been rising over time. Somebody has to fill this vacancy, no? And if you look at the skill shortages across the different countries, the number of areas where they face skill shortages in Thailand is a 36 out of 39. So across the board, it means that they face labor shortages. So that's why the government like Thailand very recognizes the important role of migrants, that they feel they help factories to run, they help services to be provided to customers. Mm. It's a real GDP. Oh, it's already, yeah, yeah. Yeah. This one, you are talking, I thought you were talking about the regression. This is in constant US dollars. Yeah. Otherwise, it doesn't, you cannot compare. No? Yeah. Yeah. Mm. So what does this mean? Is labor shortages mean that it's essentially labor migration can help balance the demographic differences across countries. Countries where they need labor can attract more foreign workers to fill the gap. No, so we can see that in demographics already. This may get intensified. So if we look at the demographics in like in 2023, so these countries like Korea and Japan in the EAP are already experiencing this aging population here, right? On the other hand, we see this still quite a bit of youth bulge. This blue bar refers to population aged between 15 and 24. You see quite a bit of youth bulge in the Philippines or Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and other countries. So, which means these two countries can be met in terms through migration in terms of labor needs. This may become, as I said, this may become intensified because countries are rapidly aging, no? Even country like Thailand is very rapidly aging. We already, all the newspaper talk about Korea, how fast it's aging and how much labor shortages they would have because of low fertility rate. The fertility rate is less than, what is it, 0.7, I think, is the lowest in the world. So this all suggests that the labor migration is going to intensify. And when we sort of project that how much labor would be needed in this country through dependency ratio. Dependency ratio is how many people, the people workforce supporting those who are not in labor force. So what this sort of map shows is that how much more working age population you need in 2035, by 2035, in order to maintain the same dependency ratio as in 2020. Yeah. So when we look at like a Thailand, right, it's over 35%. You need 35% more workforce in order to maintain the same dependency ratio. However, here we do not adjust any education, human capital differences. So as countries grow, maybe they would have a greater human capital accumulation. So therefore, they could advance towards less labor-intensive technologies. So therefore, you may need less labor than in the past. That's possible, right? That's what we talk a lot in China's case. So China, you see this also rapidly aging, low fertility rate. So therefore, they will need a massive amount of labor going forward. But at the same time, Chinese human capital is fairly high. So therefore, they are also, we know that technologically they are in the frontier. So therefore, they may not need as many workers as we project. So with that, maybe I could briefly talk about refugee scene. I don't know how many of you are interested in this, but at the same, what I want to say is that in media, we talk a lot about refugees, right? But at the same time, when we look at the population, it's a very small amount. And yet, even if it is small, the number has been increasing very rapidly. And also that applies the same in this region as well. And it's largely coming from Myanmar, right? So this sort of could be an opportunity for some countries like Thailand, where they need a labor, so that the refugees can be important the workforce by giving their right to work. But at the same time, it could be a pressure for the social assistance front. But it all really depends on. It's a very, very complex area. It also depends on who the refugees are, right? And you can create a lot of skills mismatches, because if you don't recognize their education, even if they are doctors and nurses, they may not be able to practice. They may not be able to utilize, depending on the destination country's education, recognition of these qualifications. So I would like you to think along that line when we talk about when you discuss refugee issues. So then there was an overall sort of migration trend we looked at. So, and also certain elements that would influence why people want to migrate, right? So then next natural question is, what are the impacts? So let's look at the first in the origin countries, in the home countries. So this impact is very complex, no? We can look at it at the household level and later on community level, later on in the countrywide. But we can maybe first focus on the remittance side, because when we talk about the migration, the first thing come out is remittances, no? Especially when it comes to temporary labor migration, majority of people whom we interviewed said they send about 80% of their income to family. So they support family income. So these remittances, essentially an income for household, right? Additional income for household. So therefore they increase expenditure on education and their children's health care. So which leads to strengthening human capital in the country, right? And the second one is that sort of migration spillover effect. Let's say you see your neighbor go to a different country and then start to earn high income. So let's say if the person who went there was a nurse. So you say, oh, I want to study also nurse. Maybe I invest in my education, educate myself more. So therefore, I would have also foreign opportunities, right? So it also gives a higher human capital in the country. However, let's say if your neighbor is just had a elementary grade education, and this is in fact what we saw in Mexico, a study suggested. So it's a father with elementary education went to the US and then made a good money and sent money home. So what we see is that children have a less incentive to study. Oh, I don't need to study, no? I may just drop out and then go to the US for higher income earning opportunities. So it can work both ways. It really depends on the country specific, but that's what we saw in Mexico. So that can be negative for the country as a whole if that happens. And then also migration means that this, when the parents, especially mother, goes abroad. We see that in Indonesia, no? Mother goes abroad for domestic work in Singapore. Then the children do not have a mother. So the absence of a parent can influence children's academic performance. So here is evidence is a little bit weak because of data issues, but some studies suggest that children in the migrant family could have weaker performance. But this evidence is rather strong in China's case, where when they look at the internal labor migration. So that's a sort of household level effect. But so what we can say at the economy wise, in general, remittances is a positive for human capital development. And also with a larger spending capacity, they can contribute to poverty reduction. Yeah. And this human capital development can also have a next effect on increasing labor productivity at home, also innovations at home, so that the country can start to have a new competitive edge in a new industries, right? So we saw that, we see that like in the Philippines, when a lot of people started to have nurse education because of overseas nurse employment opportunities. They started to have this BPO, business process outsourcing industries. So these people start to work in these BPO companies doing the medical transcript. So the Philippines is now very strong on this BPO sector, right? Of course, other factors matter, but that human capital factor also matters to help countries to develop the new competitive edge. But and also you may ask about, then what about the labor side, right? People leave, it's a direct impact is a labor side. You have less number of people in the country to work. So if you have a large unemployment, the departure of people could reduce unemployment pressure, right? So because you have less people, and those unemployed may be able to employed for the job of which for the migrants left behind. And also this could facilitate labor reallocation across different areas. Let's say many migrants are coming from, let's say, Jakarta. So suddenly Jakarta may have a labor shortage. Then people from other regions can come and fill that job. But there we also, we can see the labor market effects coming from remittances. Because we said the remittances boost the household income, so therefore they start to spend more, so there will be more demand for goods and services, which can create jobs. So therefore, people may be more in demand in certain areas, especially in the remittance, in the areas where high remittances are coming in. So what we see in India, for instance, so a lot of migrants from Kerala region went to Middle East. So they sent money home. So this money was spent on building homes and purchasing goods and services. So there is a sudden surge of demand for the surge of construction worker demand. But the many men left for Middle East, no? So they didn't have enough labor to build home. So what did we see? People from all the way to Kolkata, that is on the east, in the east side, they travel to Kerala to meet the demand. So that's why I think labor market side is a very, very complex, because sometimes people say remittances boost the household income, so therefore that the household member may not work because their reservation wages go up. But what I want you to take away from here is it's not that simple. There are multiple factors affecting in the labor market dynamics. So I talked about the remittances. So then the question is, you're asked how much is, oftentimes they talk, no? So how much is Indonesia getting? in terms of remittances. So Indonesia is receiving its estimates, and remittance data is usually it's estimate. It's around 14 to 16 billion dollars in 2024, which is equivalent to around 1% of GDP, and that becomes much more important. So it's a very small fraction of the foreign exchange compared to the country's GDP, but it becomes a very, very important for a small country like Tonga, for instance. You see Tonga's in the remittances, because it's a small economy, and many of these workers are working in Australia or New Zealand, so they send remittances. So these remittances can be equivalent to around half of GDP. So it's a huge, very important resource for the country. So it really depends on which country you are talking about. So then let's talk briefly about, so we talked about the impact in origin countries. So let's talk about now the impact in destination countries. What do we hear often? Migrants take our job away. Migrants depress wages. So is it really the case? The question is, it really depends on who the migrants are. Yeah. So if we look at the studies in the US, migrants, so one example, it's so when people, I think it was 1969 or so, or 70, massive number of people left Cuba, yeah, for the US. So they mostly arrived in the Miami and that area. So you think, oh, they take job away, no? So therefore, the locals who demand the higher wages might have lost the jobs. So indeed, that was an initial effect, yeah, because with the given jobs, you have more people coming in, and they're okay with the lower wages. So then the employers would hire people who are willing to work at the lower wages, right? So that led to indeed natives, the unemployment. However, it really depends on how your investment environment is. US investment environment is very conducive. So business immediately see, oh, we have more labor available. So therefore, they injected more money in their business, which created more jobs, right? So in the end, in a medium term, that effect has disappeared completely. So it depends on what kind of conditions we have and what kind of jobs we're talking about. When it's also what we see in the US is when migrants come in. So in the US, you have a huge Spanish-speaking migrant population, no? So they may not be necessarily able to speak English fluently. So you see the specialization in jobs. So a moving company, for instance, the locals, American, the natives would deal with the customers. They both are low skilled, yeah? They deal with the customers, but the migrants work on actual packing. So it creates a specialization. We see that in Malaysia too. So many manual jobs are done by migrants, and with the similar qualifications, Malaysians would work a little bit higher level or different job. They are not substituting each other. Mostly they are complementing each other. And that's what we saw in many other countries where the migration regime is relatively favorable. So that's one. So migrants are not necessarily taking jobs away. It may be. In Malaysia case, taking jobs away actually occurs for migrant population. When the new migrants come, the existing migrants may lose their job because of wage differentials. And because are they really, then the next question is, are they depressing wages? Like I said, initially, yes. But as migrants also gain experience, they demand higher wages. So that does not necessarily depress wages. But also another thing is, like I said, natives are specializing their own, more specializing their jobs. As a result, they demand higher wages as well. That's what we also saw in Malaysia happening. So overall, we can see that migration is a very important element to address challenges, not only the development challenges in origin countries, but also in address challenges are coming from population aging and low fertility rates in destination countries. So we did this um, uh, this big macro modeling work. It's a very, very boring, but it's super complex one that based on this micro foundation. And it's a 3-country model. That is, in this country model, we use Japan as a destination country that is aging. And we use the Philippines as a country supply labor, and then the rest of the world. So we ran the scenarios about impacts of different policies, right? As an Asian country like Japan, you have many policies to do, like you invest in technology in order to be less dependent on the labor. You can also boost the female labor force participation, or you can open up more migration. So what we see here is that when country like Japan open up the migration, implement different policies, the longer term growth impact is much more moderated for the migration. So what it means is the migration policy is much more effective in addressing challenges that are coming from population aging and low fertility rate in long term, not right. But of course, countries can have a different policy, or the combination of all of these, preferably better. And so then that's when we look at in the sending countries, like the Philippines, we also talk about people leave, so therefore less number of workers, maybe outflow of human capital is a brain drain, is really helping this country like the Philippines, no? So the simulations show that it's whether it is a high-skilled migration or low-skilled migration, country does benefit through remittances. And especially when these remittances are spent on human capital, the positive impact is far greater. But like I briefly mentioned about brain drain. So there is this distributional cost in the migration space. So in the origin countries, so we can see it is a social cost. So we talked about briefly, no, that the children without parents, that it's a social cost can be negative. So maybe there is a room for the government to intervene in this space to correct this negative social cost, like providing child care services or supporting more community-based child rearing programs, or especially after-school caring programs. I think you have this nice Migrative program in Indonesia that is dealing this issue at the community level. That's, I think, a very good example. And then another big issue is like a really big elephant in the migration room, no? It's a brain drain. Everybody talks about brain drain. We do not want people to move out of our country, especially engineers, doctors, and nurses, teachers. True, when you have a small pool of these high-skilled workers, outflows of them may damage the public service, right? Because it takes some time to generate these human skills. But what we see here is that, in fact, this share of high-skilled immigration is linked with the high human capital in the country. So essentially what it means is a large share of high-skilled migration, so-called brain drain, occurs more in the countries where they have more human capital, like in Singapore. Maybe because they find domestic competition for given jobs, high-skilled jobs, is too fierce. So they may go abroad, right? Another thing as to the brain drain is that we talked about remittances. Yeah, so it's even if high-skilled migrants, they do send money home, and they tend to earn higher wages than the low-skilled counterparts. So this amount that the remittances can be invested into developing new human capital, which could lead to domestic innovation and boosting productivity. So it may lead to brain gain. Or like I said earlier, neighbor nurse goes abroad, so therefore I in fact enroll myself in the nursing school instead of stopping at high school, right? So therefore you see the effect of migration in generating more nurses. So it really depends on to what extent the country has a human capital pool, and to what extent education systems are adaptive to address people's desire to invest in education. Even if I do have money, and even if I have a desire to go to medical school, but the education system cannot respond to certain surge of medical course demand, then you cannot do that, no? So this flexibility in the education system to be able to respond to demand is very important when we talk about brain drain issue. And in destination countries, we talked about it, right? Migration's impact on the unemployment. Like I said, it can happen in a very short term, but it can be moderated over longer term when investment responds. And also skills mismatches. This is a big issue, very big issue. So what African doctors do in Sweden? They practice they practice doctor? No. Yeah. So they drive taxi, right? Because Sweden does not recognize his education in their home countries. So when Sweden realized, oh, we need a more doctor, what do? We can open the door for the new doctor come in from other countries. And then somebody said, yeah, but we also have these migrants who have a medical education, but they are driving taxi. So let's see how many doctors, in fact, do we have. So they surveyed. And they found out it's not just doctors, right? Nurses too. They are not in the nursing job. So that helped governments to reform the system to recognize these skills, or help them to take the necessary licensing related tests, so that this skills mismatch can be met. So these are very important policies. These skills mismatches occur because of policies or these regulatory issues, especially as to recognizing these certificates, especially in high skilled segment. So these policies are indeed the one determining where we go, how long, for what jobs. For a lot of low-skilled ones, because it is based on these bilateral labor agreements between the origin and destination countries. However, when we look at high-skilled migration, like doctors, right? It's a unilaterally open. Countries just open up which segments they want to open, like Thailand, they say they have all they are open for high-skilled migration, but they reserved a certain segment of jobs that are not allowed for foreign workers, foreigners. Australia, on the other hand, they list out what occupations are open for foreigners. So it's they just unilaterally decide, no? On the other hand, like I said, the low skill segment is very different. First of all, it's not allowed. If it is allowed, then it's through this bilateral labor arrangement. Yeah, and of course, some countries don't do that. Some countries are open up based on their own policies, like the U.S. You know, they don't do these bilateral labor arrangements, but they have this employer sponsor program. So if you want to be employed, let's say construction worker or manufacturing worker in the US, you need to have sponsor from the employer to get the visa. But getting that requires networks, information, so a lot of costs are involved. But like Singapore, they unilaterally decide which countries can send low-skilled workers to their countries. So there are different systems, but in general, in low-skilled segment, bilateral labor arrangement dictates where you go, for what jobs, for how long. Yeah. So we look at this migration policies across different countries in this region to see to what extent the migration policies are restrictive, especially when we compare with low-skilled migration with high-skilled. No? So what we see here is that the restrictiveness of high-skilled migrations is far less than the low-skilled labor migration. Yeah? And country like, as I said, Thailand, it's just open, but you have a certain jobs that you cannot take. And on the other hand, you can see the Singapore, Australia is a much more restrictive than compared to Thailand. Maybe it's because of they have more competition. Many high-skilled ones to come to the Singapore or Australia. No? But in low-skilled segment, you see it is all this restrictiveness. Not only the entry barriers, but also conditions of stay. So how long they can stay, whether they can change their jobs or not. And also welfare measures. So whether they can have a social protection or pensions and so on. So overall, the restrictiveness in the low-skilled segment is higher than the high-skilled one. So this, you can say, it's a bit of irony, no? Because you make a bilateral labor arrangement to open up. So in a sense, the restrictiveness should be less. And yet, it's much more strict than high-skilled labor migration. So this high-skilled labor, very, very restrictive labor migration, especially in low-skilled segment, what does that mean? That increase the cost, right? Increase the cost not only for the government in implementing and managing this one, but also for migrants themselves. You have to meet all these conditions, especially those entry barriers. So we have done this survey across different corridors. And what it shows is that the migration cost, what migration cost refers to is what low-skilled migrants has to pay in order to prepare for their documentation to meet what the destination government requires. So documentation cost, the fees pays to the recruitment agencies because you don't know what jobs are available, right? So recruitment agencies play a very important role to matching between the workers and employers. And they played a crucial role, right? Because if you're an employer in Saudi Arabia, you don't know what kind of qualifications or the backgrounds that the worker in Indonesia have, right? So recruitment agencies fill that gap, right? They do this matching. So they charge this fee, the matching fee, to migrant workers. And then it also includes a traveling cost. So let's say in the low skill segment, not just low skill segment, in high skill too, in some countries, you need to have a medical clearance. You don't have a TBs and you don't have certain diseases that is transferable to other people. So this medical clearance, you need to go to hospital to get done. No? So if you're in rural areas, you have to travel to a bigger town to get that done. So we include here migration costs, also those travel costs as well. And also the international travel. So you, from Indonesia, to, let's say, Indonesia to Saudi Arabia. So then we sum them up, and then we compare that with their earnings. Because even if you pay $10,000, if your monthly wage in destination is $20,000, and it's only 50% of your 1 month wage, it's not so expensive, right? However, if it is $200, but your earning in destination is, let's say, just for the sake of comparison, is $100. You have to work 2 months, no, to recoup the money. So that's why we want to see this in terms of share of your wages in destination. So when we look at that, you can really see this Middle Eastern corridor has a very high migration cost. So those workers from Pakistan working in Saudi Arabia incurred migration cost that is more than 10-month wages. So which means they will have to work at least 10 months in order to recoup what they paid for to migrate, what they paid out of their pocket in home country. Yeah. On the other hand, what we see, you can see it's in the Korea or Spain case. The migration cost is about a month's wage or less. So in Spain case, it's a primarily seasonal worker coming from Latin America or the Morocco. So they have a network at place. They don't necessarily need a recruitment agencies, and their travel cost is low. So therefore, their migration cost is also low, and they earn about 1,000 to 1,500 euros per month. In Korea's case, how many of you know about the Korea's migration system? Okay, so no, so
Yes, I'm Sigit. I'm not from School of Economics, but I'm a research fellow at the School of Strategics and Global Studies, majoring on international relations. A little bit wonder with your previous statement is first about the Cuban, I mean like the people from Cuba moving to the United States in terms of the migration discourse, right? It's happening around 1960 during the US and the Cuba conflicts. So we can call not directly they want to move to the United States, but they have to move in order to get like a securing space, and they arrive in the southern part of the U.S. You mentioning the Mississippi. Yes, right. So they went there and they just living there. So with the situation are complicated. And when I take a look, the situation are the same like South Korea, because in the 1895 and 1910 along the Japanese colonial periods, Japan also pushed Korean government to bringing or moving along these Korean people come to Japan, which is to work's purpose or something else. And even they still stay in Japan after 100 years. So maybe the first question to you is it South Korea as educated and also rich high income in the world as well, one of them, but still they didn't want to move back, or they just want to create new Korean district in Japan. So what we call is Zainichi. But in the modern case, because these cases, I mean, like a lot of graphics you mentioning are about more Southeast Asia. In South Korean case as well, in the 1960s, President Park Chung-hee moving not 100 but million of Korean, because at that time South Korea also poorest in the world, which is poorest than Indonesia and the Philippines following the GDP. But I didn't know well about GDP because my major is not economic ones. So in South Korean case, South Korea government also pushing the people come to Germany as nurse. So they works as unskilled laborers and they got the money and moving back to South Korea. So in this the discourse, when you say a lot of people also come to South Korea, of course, now Korea is already high income and then can offer much more good opportunities. But I think before Korean people are also already had experience more dilemmatic like Southeast Asian people today. So I'm wondering, is it the past experience for South Korea can be another variable for Korean people and Korean government in dealing with, migration. I mean, like the workers issue. And the third point is when I live in South Korea as well, doing my PhD research works, I found it in Mokpo example and Goje, the southern district in South Korea. Most of them are old people. I didn't find young people even in the market in Gwangju example. But then I'm so curious, a lot of Southeast Asian people, especially Vietnam. So a lot of Vietnamese married with Korean people. So the question is, I South Korea are jumping up as the leading economic and educated society. Is it they still neglected or they need it exactly? Because even in the small district like Mokpo, which is the few people, Korean people want to visit, but I stay a little bit longer over there, and I found it that a lot of Vietnamese, they works there, even in the market, and then open small vendors for food. Yeah, so the situation is a little bit kind of a shifting that, which is it the migration basically is still needed by what we call is rich countries, like your cases here is Australia and then Singapore, Malaysia, or even Thailand, which is I little bit not yet agree when you say Thailand need much more because of the aging problem. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you. This is really, I think it's a too lengthy discussion that this involves. So here, what I wanted to say is the recent low-skilled labor migration in Korea. So there is a called the employment permit system. So they made an agreement with the 16 different countries in Asia, including Central Asia. So that includes Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and these countries. So this employment permit system, under that, as an Indonesian, you can go for low-skilled jobs. So like if a lot of them work in factories, and the Timor-Lesteans work in the fisheries, and some of them work in agriculture, but majority is in the manufacturing sector. So the reason why the system offers low migration costs for, let's say, Indonesians is because government does the job matching. The example I gave you earlier is recruitment agencies play an important role to match jobs, right? So you need to pay for that. So in some countries say that it's that the employers should pay too, but it's that happens, but in the end the employer deducts that amount from salary. So it's a matter of exactly. But Korea's case, so how did they arrive there? So they had a trainee system like Japan earlier before employment permit system. So then they realized, oh my God, these people overstays their visa. Why are they overstaying? Because from an immigration ministry's viewpoint, the overstay is a headache, right? They need to have a paper, a valid paper. So that when they look into that, what they realize is these people paid like $2,000, some paid $10,000 to come to Korea. They need to recoup that money, no? So within a year, they couldn't recoup their money. So they have to stay over their visa. So they go on the ground. No? So it's social problem. So the government said, let's get rid of recruitment agencies. Government does job matching. But we need to screen people who they are, but we need to have an objective measure. What is the objective measure? They asked to firms. They said, everybody can come and learn how to operate this machine in 1 month, 2 months, but they need to speak Korean to communicate. So the government said, okay, screening measure is a Korean language test. If you pass the language test, you can apply for Korean jobs. Then we list give your application to companies. Companies select you, then you get the job. Yeah, which means suddenly $2,000, $10,000 recruitment fee disappeared. Yeah, so they don't have to pay anything, but they have to pay the airfare. So this is what it shows, that airfare they pay. So about $1,000, and they make nowadays the minimum wage is rather high. So minimum they make about $2,500 per month. So $1,000 flight ticket is less than 1 month wage. So that's why its gains from migration to a country like Korea is high. So in a sense, this policy, so therefore this policy is considered to be gold standard in the global setting for low-skilled labor migration, because they also provide all the insurance that are equivalent to domestic native workers, and also pension as well. This may, yeah.
Are the migrants kind of getting what they pay for, in the sense that it costs something to migrate? And I think you've clarified that in some cases there's a policy failure and it's quite exploitative, and maybe in other cases it's a useful service. From the Korean side, or from the receiving country side, this visa overstays is a good example of an incentive from the receiving country side to enter these kinds of agreements. Are there any other drivers from their side to try and make it cheaper and easier?
Receiving countries.
Yeah, for the receiving countries? Any of these other social problems, or does it create huge bottlenecks? Or is it more of a bit of a goodwill gesture? We want people here who are under less exploitative conditions.
I think it's, if we look at like a Middle East corridor, the receiving countryside, this recruitment business is a huge industry. It's very complex. So So let's say when Indonesian domestic worker goes to Saudi Arabia, usually two recruitment agencies at play. So recruitment agency here and corresponding recruitment agency in Saudi Arabia. So the question is, they need to, of course, make money, right? But at the same time, to what extent the government can regulate them? So of course, through licensing and so on. So they try to regulate so that the so-called overcharge won't be taken place. But at the same time, like in Saudi Arabia, so these recruitment agencies are so powerful. It's really powerful. Even like recruitment agency in Bangladesh, the origin country, they are very powerful. So reforming or incentivizing them to make it transparent, it's a very policy-wise, it's very challenging. And
So are you kind of saying where it is exploitative, it depends who's making that money and how well linked they are as to whether that's
Yeah.
okay or not?
Yeah.
And then on the other side of the scales is what kinds of social issues are caused by those being exploited, like overstaying or criminality of another kind. Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
Thanks.
So it really depends on how the government sees what's where they put the emphasis, right? In Korea case, they didn't want these overstays because they go underground. It's creating black market. And then that creates public perception against migration while the country needs migrants. So you do not want to have a negative views forming within the country. On the other hand, like in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, essentially the low skill segment is not competed by native workers at all, right? Only the low skill segment is occupied by foreign workers. They take it granted. So they don't necessarily worry about any negative views on this the migrant workers. But at the same time, the system, you must have heard this kafala system. It's tightly controlled by employer. So your employment is linked with the particular employer, and that employer sort of dictates your welfare. And that system, there is international community calling for reforming that system. So like country like UAE has reformed it to make it more favorable for migrant worker protection. But I think it's the more like evidence, a lot of evidence is coming out, and those things can support policy change that we see in like country like in UAE. So that's what the international community and academia can do more to shed light on this analytical evidence on migrant workers' welfare and the policy reform, subsequent policy reforms in the destination countries. So overall, but I think like your point about Korea's case, of course, the earlier experience as migrant descending country does influence policies. They don't want their workers' experience in 70s to be repeated in their home country. They want migrants to be fairly treated. That definitely plays a role, and it's basically coming from the fact that the overall the government recognizes that we need migrant workers, and we need to treat them well. We don't want them to go through the difficulties like a Korean miners did in Germany in 70s, right? So so that's a long story about the migration cost. So let's remember that migration cost it can be a bottleneck for individuals to pursue for foreign jobs in the low skill segment because they need to pay this money out of their pocket. And when it compares to their earnings, oftentimes in certain destination, it can be very expensive. Yeah. So that's what I just said. It's really burden. It depends on how much you earn in destinations. So I think we all sort of covered this one. So it's all this cost comes from what kind of policy barriers are at play. We did this survey with Cambodian, Laotian, and Myanmar workers in Thailand, and it really showed that it's the migration cost can come down. Yeah, it's over time when the governments make every process or online processing and technology-based processing and more control on the recruitment agencies, more transparency, then in fact the cost can come down. But when there's a lot of competition, no? So it's like a Myanmar refugee or workers fleeing the country for Thailand, for instance, it creates a huge influx. So in that process, because of this competition, people are more willing to pay more and more. So in that case, also migration costs can go up because of this market force. So so while all the policy barriers are at play, incurring migration costs, we also see overall in the EAP countries who, especially those countries face population aging and low fertility rate, are reducing barriers for migration. So they're making the system more favorable. This is a huge change, yeah? Especially like in Japan. They have closed it for a long time. And as maybe some of you know already, this is a specified skilled worker program. That is a big change that allow low-skilled and semi-skilled workers to come into countries. And they also focus more on integration. So they, especially at the community level, so that the friction between migrants and the natives can be reduced. So therefore, overall, in general, the public perception about migrants, negative public perception can be moderated. And because literature suggests this integration or increasing contacts between migrants and the natives could really elevate the negative perception of migrants. People may have this perception because they read a paper, but they don't know any migrants. But once they live next to each other, they get to know we are all human beings now. We all have a nice side, bad side. So you get to know each other, then it reduces this negative perception. So therefore, countries, especially Japan, starting to allocate more and more budget for integration, increasing the contacts between migrants and the natives, supporting migrants' language acquirement, like a Japanese language or Korean language or the local language. Yeah? But at the same time, more can be done so that public perception can be more favorable towards the migrants. So when the policies are well implemented and well designed and well implemented, then they also see more positive outcomes coming from migration. So then the public perception also changes. So we see that in the Korea's case, this is coming from world value surveys over several rounds. So you have to remember, North Korea was a homogeneous society. It was unlike Indonesia, right? It was closed until early 1990s. It was very closed the country. So therefore, their views about foreigners were very negative. So you can see that the perception about the foreigners has really moderated over periods. So this may owe to the maybe good policies. Of course, there are some bad policies too, but in general, more favorable policies for foreigners, and also this interaction, like creating like a platform for the locals to have a direct contact with the migrants, and creating fairs. They even have this like entertainment shows over weekend so that the locals can see the natives, the migrants, different aspects, so that it would create a more positive perceptions. So with that, I would like to really summarize that is migration in our region has been expanding rapidly, but more room to grow, because people do want to migrate. People do see the wage gaps. People do see limited opportunities at home. And also the destination countries face pressing needs for foreign workers, so that the policies can be more accommodating in order to respond to these pressing demands. And those can be really, first, reducing migration cost, and second, having a good skills match. Not the skills are wasted. Even if low skilled jobs, you don't want university graduates are coming for a factory job, factory machine operator job, no? So you would like to have a good skills match between the two. And in the destination countries, we can do more on the role of remittances in household welfare improvement, and also broadly development, but this gearing towards more human capital development, so that migration can be more positive overall in the economy. So with that, let me stop here. And if you have, I don't want to necessarily discuss these policy reforms, because it's a region-wide. But I would love to hear from you what kind of policy reform should be there in order to increase the net gains from migration for individuals or community households, communities, and broadly economy-wide. Let me stop here.
Thank you so much, Soonwha. I have one question from YouTube, and I actually have one questions about your questions, your suggestions for discussion. So let me start from the question from I don't know his actual name actually. Someone from YouTube. He asked, so as Indonesia is currently advancing the capacity building of migrant workers through vocational training and competency certification programs, I would like to ask, based on international experience, what are the key factors in ensuring that vocational migration pathways are genuinely aligned with demand-driven labor markets, so that skill development translate into better employment outcomes and strong bargaining positions from migrant workers? So that's his questions. My question is that I think last year I was working on this topic about migration within ASEAN. So one of the policy that they're trying to push is temporary migrants between firms, so firm to firm, intra firm actually migrants, and this can be starting from sectors that really need this migrant workers only for example, peak season. So in tourism, for example, within 4 seasons, they may ask chefs from Indonesia to Thailand only for certain months when they have really high peak, and then coming back. and this can be done through mutual recognitions of the certifications. So is there any in ASEAN, this is the sectors of course push for it because they really need it, and it's easier because this is within firm migration, so they know the qualification and so on. But of course, the other sectors, of course, and labor usually do not really like it, because why don't you just open it to the current domestic workers? So is there any kind of like such policy that enhance through this business to business that work has been working in the international experience? Thank you. Oh, you want to collect first? Okay. Any other questions first? Okay. Yeah.
So maybe before I forget, I go to your question first. So it's intra company mobility is, as you know, you did this international trade. So within general agreement trade and services, the movement or is it intra-company or inter-company? Intra-company, no? Intra-company movement is, in general, it's open. In most countries, it's open. But the question is, for what jobs are they allowing? So usually it's executives in the high level. No, it's less of the semi-skilled segment. And also duration. I think in the GATS, the duration is a bit shorter, 90 days or something like that. So in that area, I think we already have the basis to move forward in the international arena. No, so the countries are committed to remain open on that. So it's I guess a matter of really getting the acts together, especially in the ASEAN forum, because even in ASEAN forum, fora, the movement between companies, within companies, across countries is allowed. So next step is, like you suggested, how long and also for what jobs. So I don't know whether that is addressing your question, but it's yeah, that is international. The other countries, yeah, I think it's a 90 days. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This has been issue also in the US too, no? It's there is quite a bit of, especially in high skill segment, there is they tend to have more resistance because they want to protect their jobs, and there could be like associations and so on. But when it comes to certification or the recognition of certification, within ASEAN, we have this mutual the countries are committed to recognize the qualifications of, is it three occupations? It's engineers, architects, and medical ones. So I think my memory is fading. So those are the agreements. So the question is, are we advancing on this front? No, not really. I think there's only 9 architects were in fact recognized over how many years. Why is that so? Because it's the country level, at the government high level, you can say, oh, we recognize the qualifications coming from your country. But when it comes to recognition of qualifications, it's often professional bodies. They are the ones determining. Even if at the country level we do recognize your medical education, medical association may say, no, we don't recognize. You have to go through all this screening. You have to take the test. That's also like, for instance, in Australia case, they have a very complex system to go through that, and they want to streamline it so that the recognition of qualifications obtained in other countries can be recognized much faster. So there are efforts going on in order to recognize it, but still it is automatic recognition is fairly low unless it is in Europe, right? Within Europe, they recognize the what is it, Bologna process, that the countries recognize your education, even if it is in different countries. But that's really within Europe, which is in line with the European Union's this common market objective. And in terms of this training and meeting, whether it is in line with the demand, I think it is really depending on what area we are talking about. So certainly, like I said, like we discussed earlier, no, countries do face skills shortages. You can see it in Australia, they have a huge, long list of labor shortage across different occupations. Like in Thailand, almost all jobs, occupations, they have a shortage and it's open for foreigners. And the question is, so let's say teachers, right? And England need teachers. So England in the past, they recognize a teacher qualification from Jamaica. So it's all these Jamaican teachers left, in fact, for England. No? So they started to have a teacher shortage. So this type of the recognition, that it's a unilateral action by England to recognize its qualification. Then it's people go because they know their skill, their qualification is recognized. So that is a one. Here you do the training and then do the certification. And the question is that who recognizes this certification? Is it through the bilateral agreements between Indonesian government and destination government? Or is it through the unilateral action by destination government or at the professional associations in destination countries? So one example in Indonesia is the one on this nursing agreement between Indonesia and Germany. So Germany, the nursing association and the Indonesians agreed that if you do A, B, C, D, E, Germany will recognize your certificate, yeah, nurse graduates. It's recognized, and then you can apply for jobs in Germany. But bottleneck, German language test. Because it's a nursing job, you are dealing with human life. So the most destination countries do require you to speak the native language. So you need to pass, I think that's A2 level or some German test. Very difficult. And so Ministry of Manpower, in fact, offers. So Ministry of Manpower offers this course for 1 month who are qualified for nursing jobs in Germany. But it's a 1 month is not enough for them to do. And they cannot continue not working, right? So that's why in the end, because they cannot pass this language test, they cannot go, even if certificates are recognized. So there is a secondary barrier like that. So in that case, there is a maybe two governments can agree on like a nursing internship in Germany as an intermediary process. Yeah, so that they can have an exposure to German language at the early on. Maybe that would help them to pass the language test. But this is really challenging. We see that Indonesian nurses in Japan, right? Under employer, what is this economic partnership agreement between Japan and Indonesia? Nurses from from Indonesia can go and work as a nurse, but they're not recognized as a nurse because they don't recognize the certificate 100%. So you still have to pass the Japan nurse test in Japanese. So they have to acquire that the language skills in order to pass the test. But initial hurdle is not there, right? They may not speak Japanese language when they go to Japan, but they have to learn Japanese in order to work as a full-time, fully licensed, to pass the license test, and then to work as a fully licensed nurses. So that is a different model compared to Germany's, right? So then workers compromise in their work, right? Because they graduated as a nurse, their degree is not 100% recognized, and therefore they work as a bit grade lower than what the nurse does. So that is another compromise that takes place. So there are different trade-offs. However, I think it's when the training is given, it's very, very important to follow, what is this called? The ISIC, this international standard, something ISO. I think some of these vocational qualifications are internationally, the courses are internationally recognized. So if Indonesian government sign up to certain qualification, agreement, then it means that the course offered for, let's say welding, for instance, where demand is huge, that the Indonesian vocational course on welding is recognized internationally. So that's a one step for as a origin country like Indonesia can do. But at the same time, another thing what the World Bank has been very strongly advocating is like a global skills partnership. Yeah, so countries, it's a bit like a Germany-Indonesia agreement. So you agree on certain vocations, on developing skills in origin countries, but financing can be done by destination countries because they are the one that benefiting, right? But if they need, let's say, 10 doctors, instead of just training 10 doctors, they can train 100 doctors, because the cost to train 100 doctors might be still cheaper than training 10 doctors in their whole in Germany, for instance, right? So they can train the 100 doctors in Indonesia, and then they hire 10 doctors from that. So that is the kind of global skills partnership that World Bank is advocating. And that really requires great coordination or partnership between education institutions. So not just putting the government aside, no, education institutions and the employers, the firm side, and also on this this certification technical assessment boards. So these all have to come together to on top of who's financing it, no? So it's a very complex. So that's why this takes time, but this is really a win-win mechanism in migration in reducing skills mismatch and addressing labor shortage and developing human capital in origin countries.
I'm I'm wondering first is still for South Korean case because in Japan especially because I'm living there. So even though South Korea is already jumping to giant economy, so I want to listen your opinion. Why still South Korean prefer to stay in Japan even they have a name Zainichi? So this is kind of public opinion, not yet totally what we call is in the neutral position, even though some or most of Korean people in Japan, in I mean, like in the district of Korea, example, like in Tokyo, we have seen Okubo, they already learn Japanese or speaking Japanese well, but still the local perception is not yet. I mean, like in the matters of integrating, which is the language is no barrier language for Korean people. This is what I want to learn. And the second thing is with some foreign workers who had or already completed some requirement ABCD, as you mentioned that the receiving countries like Japan in terms of nurse, so some Indonesian or Philippines or in the past Korean people who come to Germany, even though they already completed, they also can speak Japanese really well. I'm wondering in terms of the salary, because when I asked them, did you get the same salary with Japanese? Basically, never. And the Japanese government also didn't want to give kind of high position, even though they already like 10 years or 15 years works in Japan. This is my second. And the third, I want to listen from our friends from European countries, because a lot of foreigners come to Europe. I mean, like including the refugees as well. They hope they can get nice job or nice place to work in Germany or even in other countries in EU nation, which is come to 31 countries right now or 32. I'm not sure, which is in the first round 28 countries are mostly are welcoming. But when you mention an African in Sweden cases, or I say I mean like my experience, I stay in Austria as well, that these refugees didn't have kind of opportunities, even though they had already like qualified as a doctors, or they still works as lowest position, which is might be works as cleaning service or others. So I'm wondering with the EU friends, how is the EU policy best exactly? Is it they still welcoming, foreign workers, or they didn't need it exactly, or they still, depend on some qualification, like based on the each country's, cooperation, like Germany or Dutch with Indonesia in terms of nursing. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to respond directly? Any more questions? Maybe I think
Yeah.
we do not have much time. It's already
Already
14:58.
12.
Thank you. I actually can add into like your questions about Europe, because I was a foreign workers in Europe, in Germany particularly, but I was a high skill foreign workers, right? With a special visa, and but I have friends who are um sure. Okay, thank you. Um uh where was I? Yeah, but I have friends who are, transitioning into like nurses or hospital workers. Many of them start from zero, but this is possible because in Germany anyone can start from zero with using the Ausbildung, using vocational trainings and so on. but of course the test will be like on top of the skills, but and also the German language. So I think the way I see it is just the different countries have different pressing demand issues. In Germany, this is really really hard, really really pressing. They do not have many people, so they actually have the effort to do this, acknowledgement of skills, and also provisions of vocational trainings also to foreigners. So I guess different countries may I don't think across EU is the same. I think even between Germany and Netherlands is quite different. With especially Finland and Sweden will be very different. And on top of it, because many of the EU also have their pathways for refugees, that is also something that is quite distinct, especially for refugees, because some of them will have like an extra support to assimilate. So at least the way I see it that way. I mean, of course, it's hard, on its own learning new language, especially for a skilled work. So I can understand why even my friends have to go through the German language qualifications, and need to really learn, because they have to face high risk position. So I guess it really depends. The way I see it, it depends on the demand side also.
I agree with you, and within EU, even policies vary across countries. And when it comes to refugees, it's the most important policy is to give a right to work. Don't put them in idle, in limbo, because when they don't work, their skills get wasted, right? It's a huge human capital loss, and that also may hurt their emotional status too. So in general, countries are going towards that direction to give a right to work while they are in this screening process. Nevertheless, policies vary, and uh, what was your other question on Japan's this wage differentials between migrant workers and migrant nurses and Japanese nurses? Yeah, we saw the data. There are differences, there are gaps, and it's a private employment. Government cannot push them to match the wages. There's no discrimination. Of course, they can work on it, but it's like the wage gaps between male and females. It's the same issue. So it's is it really the productivity issue? Maybe, maybe not, right? So when we look at the migrant workers, Myanmar workers in Thailand, what we saw is after 1 year, it's a firm's perspective, right? So it's not the pure measurement, but it's from the employer's perspective. Migrants have almost the same productivity as their natives, Thai workers, after 1 year. But then the question is, do they pay the same amount? No, that is the reason why they hire migrant workers. They are cheaper than Thai workers. So I think it's a bit demand and supply issue is also playing a role in there. Why Qataris pay only $400 to their domestic workers are coming from the Philippines and Indonesia, while their GDP per capita is at what, $75,000? It's a supply issue. So many workers are still willing to go and work at their price that is set by the government. Yeah. So it is an important issue in this space, but to what extent the government can do is questionable here. It's because of its employment at the private sector level, and the Korean one. I guess I don't know much about it in terms of literature, why they are not coming back to Korea. Maybe there are many factors play a role because their parents parents and grandparents went to Japan during the early colonization period. So they established there and sort of they lost sort of connectivity maybe with their hometown in Korea, or they no longer have a Korean passport. They can still apply, but they may not have a Korean passport anymore, or they may not wanting to to come to Korea. No, so there is a nice book, Pachingo, to talk about this, how she felt when she came to Korea after so many years. So I think it's a complex issue, and I'm sorry, but I don't know much literature about it, so cannot really answer that question. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Out of time. But thank you so much, Soonwha, for coming and for sharing your knowledge. Please give an applause for Soonwha. We have a little bit of token of appreciation. This is just merchandise actually from. This little. Stay over here. Mana tuh? Ini aja. Bapak Ibu boleh ke depan. So we're just stay over. They're not moving here, but I think 2 lines or it's okay. Berdiri aja ya. Berdiri aja, stand. Silakan Bapak Ibu diri sebelah kita. Go to our right. Oh, we're this one line is for 2 lines. Yes, you can please come. Hey, Bapak. I am not eating you up. No. Di sebelah sini. Di sana ya. Kita boleh gabung anak. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much. Yeah. 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 Thank you very much. Terima kasih.